Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants.
Welcome back, brethren, to the Fort Worth 148 podcast. My name is Billy Hamilton, and I am the current Worshipful Master of Fort Worth 148 Lodge.
I am Gabe Jagush, and I am currently Senior Warden of the same, and we have a special guest with us today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Maddox. I'm a past master of Hill City 456 in Austin, Texas, and I'm the sitting Worshipful Master of the Texas Lodge of Research and District Deputy Grand Master for the 50th Masonic District of the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Texas, the 50th District being Travis County.
Charles, it's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thanks for having me here, guys.
Charles, it's a pleasure to have you on, and let's kick it off with the discussion question, which this one comes from the Freemasonry subreddit, and this topic is a Masonic quandary. Brethren, I would first like to apologize for this being my first post, but I have to ask what, if anything, I should do. I have a friend whom I met several years ago before he became a Mason. He is prone to dirty humor, but overall he means well. He was recently initiated to entered apprentice, after which he displayed the square and compass front and center on his Facebook page. I know, Facebook facepalm. Anyway, how every dirty, foul, off-color jokey post shows the square and compasses attached to it. My question, should I intervene? To be clear, it's not the humor that bothers me as much as the fact that all who see it will also see the square and compasses. The ethics of the jokes themselves can be discussed another time. Any thoughts on this one?
I mean, my first thought when I read this was, if this is a Texas Mason, I sincerely doubt that an entered apprentice found the appropriate square and compasses to put on his profile. So I would first say you need to take that down if it's the Master Mason square and compasses that are on your profile, because you're not a Master Mason yet, I presume, at least reading by the question. So that was kind of my first thought. But my second thought is, look, the square and compasses, as sacrosanct as they are to us, it is our image, it is our logo, just as, Pepsi has a logo, Coca-Cola has a logo, Nike has their logo. It's the readily identifiable symbol of Masonry. And if you're going to put that on your page, you have to recognize that you're now speaking for Masonry, whether you mean to or not. And I mean, who among us is not told a dirty, foul, or off-color joke at times? I mean, a little pitch here for the Lodge of Research. If you come to the Lodge of Research Friday nights, we tend to be a lot more humorous than most other Masonic lodges do. And I'm sure there's been a couple of jokes that have been told that are a little off-color, so to speak. But that's in the privacy typically of a conference room or a suite or something. It's not typically done on Facebook. So I mean, I would refer to, you might want to whisper some wise counsel into the entered apprentice's ear. Again, first and foremost, if this is a Texas Mason, you probably are not. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're not displaying the EA logo. You're probably displaying a Master Mason's logo, and so for that reason, the square and compasses need to come down. Let's not even get into the morality or the ethics of the jokes. And then once you kind of cross that bridge, you're representing the organization when you have the square and compasses on it, and so you need to comport yourself accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the biggest part of it, right? Is, hey, you are representing this organization, regardless of what you're doing. One of the things that this immediately brings to mind was that when I was a teenager, I was in a martial arts school, and we had a T-shirt, and once you hit a certain belt, the teacher would say, like, hey, like, I want you to wear this T-shirt. Now you can do that. And he says, but here's a rule, like, if I ever catch you misbehaving in public, if I ever, and he says, and if I catch you in a bar wearing this, like, I'm going to take the shirt off of you right there, and it's just, he didn't want his martial arts school to be represented in those settings. And I think we can kind of say the same for Masonry in a certain context. Like, we don't want on purpose or inadvertently Masonry to be associated with certain kinds of stuff, right? Off color humor is okay if you know your audience, and and it's still within the realms of appropriateness, right? Like, when I say off color humor, I'm not referring to like just being racist or something, right? I'm, edgy humor is kind of the term, right? But know your audience, and Facebook is a very wide audience, and you're kind of saying, you put your little rubber seal there, that big old square encompasses. And we had a similar situation pop up in our lodge a couple years ago, maybe longer than that, where we did have somebody that was posting stuff to Facebook that, he got his EA and immediately put a square and compasses on his profile picture. And it was like, hey, man, don't do that. Please no. Billy, what do you think?
No, I agree completely. I think a lot of people don't realize that when you put an image that's associated with a group in a public setting, you now represent that group to anybody who's watching. So you have to be careful and cognizant of the fact that any bystander is automatically going to assume, oh, so that's the way they act. And, and if you're not corrected, then, and they see this, going on for a while, say if it's your neighbor and they're like, oh, he's always saying the worst things. And then if no one goes up and talks to him about it, and he knows you're associated with us, then they may take it as, well, that means they're okay with it. It's tacit approval, if nothing else. And so I think, it's problematic in a couple of ways. One, you're representing an entire group. And then two, the teachings of Masonry are very much about, being appropriate and learning how to subdue your passions and behave in a little bit more of a gentlemanly manner than you normally would, about learning how to control yourself and control your passions. So I think that kind of behavior, without being addressed, may be something that shows that person still has some work to do, and the brethren around them needs to whisper that good counsel. So that's my thoughts on it.
And I think you kind of hit one of the most important things there, is the idea of that tacit approval, or the perception of tacit approval. I think that's the biggest concern in many aspects.
I would also go tangentially off of that. What if someone who already has a negative opinion of us, who thinks we're part of the New World Order, or any number of conspiracy theories out there, QAnon related conspiracy theories that we're trying to rule the world, all of a sudden sees this and it feeds into their perception of Masonry. I mean, now you're giving fodder to somebody that already didn't like us. Now they can use you as an example to say, see, this is one of their own doing something inappropriate or saying something inappropriate. So now, instead of just someone who's misguided, now they're going to misuse it and say, ha, here's the proof.
Yeah. So, watch yourself, or we'll have to take away that Templar gold. All right. Well, excellent. It's so that was an interesting and timely question, I think, especially with the charged political atmosphere we're in right now. You see a lot of brethren posting things on Facebook that you're like, well, you're more than welcome to have your own opinions. But you may want to be careful about how you represent the craft if you're also putting Masonic symbolism, in that very same forum.
You have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom from judgment.
Right. Yeah. So you're more than welcome to say what you want, but the rest of us can think you're a jerk for doing it. So, all right. Well, let's move into the personal questions. So, Brother Charles, actually, I'm really interested to ask you about yourself outside of the Masonic lens. And please make sure that you include what you do for a living.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I'm sure. I guess my last comment was probably a good segue to that. I'm an assistant attorney general for the state of Texas. I represent the state. Typically, I represent TxDOT in right-of-way matters. So depending upon who you are, either I am trying to keep the engine of the Texas Miracle alive by making highways better, or I'm coming in and taking your property and giving you pennies for it. So it depends on who you ask as to whether I'm friend or foe. But I enjoy my job. I love it. Most of the opposing counsels I talk to are nice people. We get along great. It's not what you see on TV where we're just always at each other's throats. We're usually pretty cordial, pretty nice with each other. We all know we hang out at the same bar, so to speak. Well, pun intended. But it's a great job. I love it. Getting a lot of good trial experience at it, and I have a fun time there. It's just a great place to be. A little bit more about me outside. I grew up here in Austin, actually. I did spend some time in San Antonio. I colloquially like to say that Austin's my physical home, but San Antonio is my spiritual home. Both my parents were born and raised in the San Antonio area. My mother grew up on a ranch 30 minutes south of San Antonio. My dad lived virtually his entire life there, and their parents were there. And I think my mother's family has been there since the early 1800s. My dad's family came from Virginia, and then from Virginia from England. So I consider myself more of an Austin, San Antonio guy. Let's see, met my wife, ironically, at a Masonic lodge. I didn't think you would find girls in Masonry, but it happened. My wife was at University Lodge with her dad, who's a past master from there, helping out in the kitchen. And I showed up to give a talk on DMLA, and my first thought was, oh my God, there's someone here my age. Holy moly, or words to that effect. It's a girl. And lo and behold, she decided to sit next to me. And to this day, I'll never understand why she did. But we both found out we were at UT together, did a couple of study dates on campus. And actually, our second date, I came down with the flu. And I was seriously tempted to not have the date. I didn't want to get her sick. My first thought, though, was if I cancel the second date, she's going to think I'm one of those guys. I'm going to show up feverish and achy and see what her reaction is. And sure enough, she's like, oh, you poor baby. I think we very quickly had dinner, and she dropped me off at my place. And I asked her years later, if I had canceled that date because of the flu, which you knew I had, what would you have done? She's like, oh yeah, you would have been one of those guys. I would never have given you another option, and we wouldn't be together now. So that's a fun story I like telling. And my daughter was born, actually. My daughter was born on January 31st of this year. And she has her daddy's lungs. She likes to keep us up at night. She likes to let us know very vocally when she is uncomfortable or hungry. So I'm hoping with daddy's lungs, she'll follow in daddy and granddad's steps and her auntie's steps and become an attorney herself. So we'll see.
So this is your first child, right?
Yes.
So do you find yourself, sometimes you're like, I remember when my oldest son was born, and I'm like, I don't know why you're crying. Are you hungry? No. Okay. Are you wet? No, you're not. And it's like a puzzle trying to figure out what's bothering you.
You're going through a checklist, and thankfully she'll do this smacking thing with her mouth and her tongue. And so I'm like, okay, you're hungry, and I'll shove a bottle in her face and she'll just devour it. Okay, we figured out you were hungry. Sometimes she just wants to be picked up and held, and okay, good, that's good enough. But there have been some moments at like 1:30 in the morning where like I'm bopping up and down, I'm holding her, I try to offer the bottle, and just nothing is working. I'll change the diaper, there's nothing in there, and it's just like, I need to go to bed. I really need to go to bed.
So one trick we had, actually, and this is completely off topic, but if nothing else worked, I would put my son Alex in the car, and we would drive around the block, and usually that worked. So
I think I'm gonna have to try that here pretty soon. You're not the first one to tell me that. So I think the bouncing up and down is now starting to wear off, and she's like, I need more movement, more vibration. So we'll see.
All right, Gabriel, I hope you're taking notes. So.
Oh God, y'all are just scaring me.
It's fun. Don't worry about it. It's fun. I mean, she's absolutely adorable. She's precious. When she's not crying for food, she's smiling voluntarily now, and she's cooing. So I mean, it's a lot of fun. There are moments too where it's absolutely worth it. And then for like 1 hour at 2 a.m, I'm just like, go to bed.
And the cuteness will last until they become about teenagers.
Exactly.
Yeah, my dad said that once I turned 13, he was like, yeah, like then it was kind of like all at war all the time.
Yeah, it's all right. Well, so Charles, let's get into a little bit about masonry. So, when did you join, and how old were you? And since you said you were a
Mhm.
DMLA, I'm pretty sure it was pretty young.
Yeah. I asked on my 21st birthday, February 7th, 2006. I was 21. I asked to be a Mason that day. I called up my chapter dad, Scrappy King. We went out to lunch at Hofbrau Steakhouse, not to be confused with the chain. This is called the original Hofbrau. It's in downtown Austin. It's been there since like 1934. We got a couple of steaks. I asked him the question, and he took it to Hill City, which was the sponsoring body of Stephen F. Austin DMLA at the time. So I was 21, did all my work pretty quickly. I was raised in August, I believe, and I was rushing the gun because I wanted to get my Scottish Rite degrees pretty quickly. I love the story of the San Antonio Scottish Rite. So I joined Hill City Lodge because they sponsored Stephen F. Austin DMLA, which I was a member of at the time. But my mother chapter is Albert Pike in San Antonio, and the San Antonio Scottish Rite sponsors them. But not only that, even though my grandfather, my dad, and I all belonged to separate blue lodges, we all belonged to the San Antonio Scottish Rite. So I asked for special requests of the then SGIG Judge Hightower, could I join the San Antonio Scottish Rite even though I live in Austin? And he said, absolutely. I think this is a beautiful story. Go do it. And you can affiliate with Austin and we'll be off to the races. And San Antonio, or the Scottish Rite at the time, had, if you paid everything up front, your endowment in full by the day of your initiation, they waived the initiation fee. And so I wanted to save that money. And as a 21-year-old paying the endowment, the chairman at the time was Reese Harrison, and he got pretty livid that a 21-year-old was paying this endowment. And he, quite frankly, told one of my best friends and I to go play in traffic because he knew he was making $1 off of us. And they were going to have to pay our per capita for the rest of our lives. So that was the speed with which I tried to move through my degree work. But yeah, I joined Masonry. My dad was a Mason. My grandfather was a Mason, 5th generation. My dad, though, isn't as active as I am. He joined, but I think maybe his 3rd meeting was my initiation. I'm not kidding. I think he went to a couple of meetings in the 80s. He maybe went to 1 or 2 in the 90s, and it wasn't for him, and that's fine. He enjoys it. He enjoys the teachings, but I think the meeting aspect he just did not enjoy, and that's something that he kind of enjoys hearing from me, is how I've taken to it like a bird to the air. And he doesn't do the meetings, but he loves the philosophies of it. He especially loves the Scottish Rite.
I think that's awesome though that he was, even if his activity level wasn't super high, that he was able to be there for your initiation, because there's a lot of guys who maybe have that family history and like they just didn't know that their parents were involved or whatever, or they don't have family history, or they do and their parents weren't able to get in on the boat, and so that's cool that he was kind of he was there for that. That's awesome.
Well, part of it too is, and I might be saying a little bit of family history here. My father and I are very close. I think maybe we've only had 2 really nasty arguments growing up. And one of those, even my mother pulled us aside and we're like, do y'all even know why y'all are arguing right now? And we're like, no. And my mom's like, just don't make up. Just, have a beer and just get it over with. If y'all can't even remember, just get over it. But he and his father had kind of a cool relationship. And I pride my father on really kind of taking steps to make sure that he wasn't going to have that kind of cold or tepid relationship with me. He was there. He couldn't make it to the fellow craft, which was fine. He had a prior obligation. By that point, I'm 21, so it's not a big deal. But he was there for my EA and he was there for my raising. And then he was, of course, there when I was installed as Worshipful Master of Hill City. He eventually transferred his membership to Hill City, actually, because I joined there. He was a member of a now merged lodge in San Antonio, Community Lodge. I think they've since merged with Davy Crockett. But that was just I think he joined that one probably because his work schedule worked out with it and he had to do his esoteric work. My grandfather was a member of Perfect Union 10 in San Antonio, and his mother lodge is also a defunct lodge, Gordon Lodge in Palo Pinto, Texas.
Charles, can you tell us what offices you've held in Masonry? Obviously, there's a couple that you have to have held through the virtue of the positions you currently hold, but kind of walk us through your ascension up the little ladder here.
So I'll talk about Hill City first. Hill City, the tradition is you start at the very bottom, Marshal Master of Ceremonies, and you work your way up. Pretty much the only offices that are not in their progressive line are Tyler, Secretary and Treasurer. I mean, even Chaplain, when I was going through, was included in the progressive line. So if you look at the litany of offices, the only one I didn't hold was Junior Steward, because we all kind of advanced an extra step that year as someone came out of the line. Probably the most difficult office for me to hold was Senior Steward. Hill City takes a lot of pride in their meals that they prepare for stated meetings. I think they're known district-wide, at least area-wide, for the meals they serve, and I burn water. I'm absolutely a terrible cook. Every time my wife asks me what I want for dinner, my first thought is, let's order out, which it pains her because she's a dietitian and she actually enjoys cooking. And I think that was what caused us to bond, was I needed her help. I called her up and I said, if you can come to Lodge and really kind of take the lead on cooking, I would owe you immensely. And so it was one of those moments where I had to rely on her. I had to take her leadership. I had to follow her lead and follow her instructions and her orders. And I think she kind of enjoyed that I was asking for that trust and that reliance. So that was something I think that really helped out. And that was the only reason it was the most difficult for me, was I just had no idea what I was doing. I knew how to buy things. I knew how to budget, but asking me to prepare a chicken dinner for 50 guys, yeah, that was stressful compared to, hey, we're going to have a pretty contentious vote tonight on a lease. That was nothing. I'll take contentious administrative matters any day of the week. So yeah, Senior Steward was probably the most difficult, but I did all the offices at Hill City except for Tyler, Secretary and Treasurer. And then at another lodge I'm affiliated with, Texana, I did serve a year as their secretary in the transitional period. So that helped me understand the administrative side of Lodge. And I'm just going to leave it at Blue Lodge. I'm really not going to go into York Rite or anything else like that.
So in all fairness, though, actually it makes sense that you're perfectly okay with difficult meetings. I mean, being an attorney, it's kind of your forte, right?
I'll tell you about what the most difficult meeting was I had. It was actually my third meeting as master. It was September 2016. I was a third year at law school, and we had a contentious vote coming up on an individual who was petitioning for the degrees. And I'm going to try to say this as politically correct as possible. The candidate was great. My wife and I treated him to lunch. We got to know him and his wife. You know, he owns his own business. He would make a good Mason. There was I'm going to call him an old guard contingent of my lodge, is probably the polite way of putting it, who still clung to some outdated non-Masonic beliefs. And we knew we were going to have a problem. And bless my junior warden, Bob Wheelis. He was actually going through the chairs a second time. So he understood the law book well. I knew the law book well. And we huddled up and we're like, okay, what are our contingencies? What do we need to do? We knew that there was going to be an issue. And we were voting on two petitions that night. And so I knew, okay, we're going to vote on them together. We're going to see some vetoes probably. We'll separate and let's inspect the ballot box to make sure that there's no hanky-panky. And we weren't satisfied. And every time it came back to me, I didn't go through the process most other masters would have gone through. We read the law and understood that there were certain things that had to be done prior to continuing the process after the vote. And I didn't exercise those. Instead, I exercised what I would call is the master's protest. I'm trying to be I'm trying not to get too much into the weeds or give away any secrets, but it was, there were some members of that lodge that did not know their law book inside and out. I'll say that. There were some protest guys that did not know what I was doing was legal. They did not know that I was using particular terminology for a reason. One of the lessons, I think my contracts professor said in law school, is words have meaning. You pick your words for a particular purpose. And so I was specifically saying, I am not satisfied. I am not satisfied. And I think by about 10:30, the other side figured out he's doing something. We wound up declaring the lodge at ease, I think, and said, we're not going to vote on this gentleman tonight because it's been 30 days. We'll wait the 60 days, and rushed through all our business at 11:45 and got out. And then I think the perfect part of that story to go with the administrative thing was I get a call 3 days later from the district deputy, who was a good friend of mine, saying, we need to go to breakfast. Let's go to breakfast. And he said, a couple of past masters of your lodge called the grand secretary's office complaining that what you did was illegal. And I asked, what did the grand secretary do? And he said, the grand secretary said, that's not my problem because I don't have jurisdiction over that. Bye. And so he was like, then they called me and I'm just asking you for your side. And I quoted him all the articles I needed. He's like, yeah, they haven't quoted one article to me. My report to the Grand Master is you exercise your prerogative as Worshipful Master. And these guys are a bunch of malcontents that are just upset that you're a young guy who knows what he's doing. That was the only rough meeting. Well, rough, I should say, as Worshipful Master. The rest of my meetings were pretty good. If you know your book, if you have a good cadre of guys that you can rely on and call up, and if you most importantly communicate with your secretary. I mean, know your secretary. Don't leave your secretary out on alert. Text, call, email, smoke signal, Morse code, really anything to get with that secretary and say, okay, what do we need to do this month? What are the administrative matters we have to take care of? Quote, what are the items on your desk that need to be addressed? So that way, when we come to the meeting, we know what we're doing. We're on the same page. Neither one of us is blindsiding the other. Because I think if you have an upset secretary, it creates some issues. So all you kids out there, play nice with your secretary. They'll make your life either amazing or a living hell.
You have to have a strong working relationship with, the secretary, but all of the lodge trustees. If your treasurer is there long term, your secretary is there long term. A lot of times, the chaplain is not somebody who I would call a lodge trustee, but your chaplain's going to be there for a long time and is usually a guiding voice for the lodge. And if you can't get these guys on board as part of your trustee cadre, you're toast. You're gone.
Well, and to be honest, this year I found that for most issues, I have a standing text group, and it is, Gabriel as my senior warden, Chris Salisbury as my junior warden, my secretary, Jeremy Gwynn, and then my treasurer, Tyler as well. It's, it's like anything that comes up that has to deal with the lodge. It's like I want all the trustees to be well aware, because I don't want there to be any confusion, any accusations of, I guess going around anybody. And they're all great guys, so I don't worry about that. As in any kind of personality conflicts. But I find if everyone is informed, then it creates a more conducive, better working environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at this point, I would ask, Charles, what do you see as the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of our fraternity, and how can we improve?
Biggest strength probably is the networking, being able to really kind of break down certain barriers and be able to talk to each other and ask for assistance, not just Masonically, but professionally. I think one of the strengths of Masonry is being able to just have a network and talk to guys and figure out what advice you can get. And that kind of barrier is already broken down as opposed to other social or civic organizations. I feel like because we've all taken the same obligations, we've all had the same lessons, I know I can approach certain individuals and ask them their opinion. I would say that's probably the biggest strength of Masonry. Oh, the biggest weakness. Who do I want to upset with this comment? I think the biggest weakness of Freemasonry right now, and I'm going to confine it to Texas Freemasonry. I don't know if there's anyone listening from the other side of the Red River, or the Sabine, or the Pecos, or the Rio Grande, but I'm going to say probably the biggest weakness of Texas Freemasonry is we don't do a good job identifying objective strategy and tactics. We don't really do it. We look for a quick, easy fix, and we don't really do a good job of analyzing a problem and figuring out. I mean, I hear frequently, what works well for Fort Worth Lodge might not work well for Hill City, and what works well for Poteet Lodge might not work well for Holland Lodge. Well, okay, that's true, but have you analyzed why that is? Have you figured out why that is? Are you introspective enough in your own lodge to figure out what your strengths and your weaknesses are? And are you able to look back and say, okay, here's where we're doing great, let's do more of this. Here's where we're not doing great, and what do we need to do to fix it? So kind of your question, I guess, is the answer. We don't do a good job of looking at our strengths and weaknesses. I think we rely too much on, we're going to get on social media, and that's how we're going to get more members, either new members or bring members back. We're going to get on social media, and we're just going to use the Facebook and the Twitter and the YouTube, and we're going to get more guys because of it. Well, that's great, but what's your plan using it? Those are great tools, but that's like telling me you're going to build a building by getting bulldozers. What's the plan? Tell me what the plan is. You ask my parents' generation, and they're slowly learning how to use Facebook. And I think my parents mostly use it to talk to old high school friends that they haven't seen in 50 years. Most of us use it for planning and organizing. So I think it depends. But I think the biggest weakness is we really don't do a good job analyzing our problems. We don't do a good job of trying to come up with custom-made solutions. We look all too often for the one-stop shop, one-size-fits-all solution.
What's actually kind of funny with bringing up Facebook, in that, most of us use it for planning and notifying each other, is so my sons, as a plural, sons generation, look at Facebook as kind of like, oh yeah, that's the old people's social media platform. So they've already moved on, and we're still trying to get lodges on Facebook because, hey, that hits the Gen X, and some of the older millennials, but the younger guys, that are in that target demographic that we want to hit, it's like, no, they've already moved on to Snapchat and, other social media platforms,
So are you telling me at the next 1464 NWSA forum for the Grand Lodge candidates, the question is going to be, how are you going to incorporate TikTok into Masonry?
Oh man.
Yeah. I mean, TikTok is, I hate to say, TikTok is huge, and I don't get it. And I guess that's a sign of my age, right? That I'm like,
Yeah.
what is this thing? Why, but we gotta move with the times. And I think it's a good point, though, that you mentioned about kind of a lack of planning. It's like, we know we got to do something. We don't know what it is. And a lot of times, there'll be minimal discussion before the decision is, let's kick the can down the road. But I think a lot of lodges would do really well by doing some kind of SWOT analysis and figure out, where are we? What are we trying to do? What do we have going for us? What do we have going against us? And how do we deal with it?
And I mean, there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be that one group of old guys or young guys or whoever that are just going to always say no. It doesn't matter if they've been in the lodge for 60 years or 6 months. We all know them. We love them. I would just say you try your best, really try to analyze a problem, really try to come up with a custom solution. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If something works great in Weatherford, yeah, try it at, Temple Lodge. If it works, great. If it doesn't, recognize that you might have to tweak it a little bit. That I think that's a big weakness in Masonry. And we just don't do a good job analyzing problems and just trying to apply that quick fix.
Right. And we're afraid to fail too. And that's one of the things. We don't want to do something and have it not turn out, but you also learn things from your failures too. And so you learn how to repackage it, reanalyze it, and come back with something even better.
And I I mean, I'm sure some people would say one of the weaknesses, we need more guys, or we need more quality guys. Well, yeah, every organization needs that. Let's say we get up to 500,000 men as Masons. Are we going to stop there, or are we going to say we need 1 million guys now? You know, I would love the problem that of the old days where we don't have enough seats for active members. That would be great. I just know it's never going to happen, at least not in the next decade or two. But that in and of itself to me isn't a problem. Look at the Grand Lodge of New York. For a period after the Morgan affair, the Grand Lodge of New York went dormant. And so is it necessarily a bad thing? They came back. Look at the Scottish
Grand Lodge of Vermont demised, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they're fine now.
Yeah, they're fine. They're really great now. Just look locally here in Texas at the Grand Council of Texas. Royal and Select Masters of Texas went dormant from the 1860s through to the 1900s. There's if you fail but you still live on, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, if you learn from the failure, figure out what went wrong and adapt. I wish I could come up with a one-stop or one size fits all answer to all masonry's woes. That's just not the way the world works. All my cases, there's always a unique little problem that happens, and I wish I could crank out a template for every case, for every motion, for every filing, but all too often, it's just, here's the shell and I have to fill in the meat.
Yeah, well, and learning through failures, part of how we improve, right? Like that's
Right.
kind of what we say we're here to do, right? And kind of on that subject, like how would you say is maybe your favorite example or best example of how the fraternity has made you a better man?
First and foremost, probably the most tangible one that people can see is public speaking. Getting up and doing degree work in front of a whole bunch of your peers can be terrifying to some people. That's helped me out. This is my first job after law school, and my bosses were pretty impressed when I got up in front of a judge with an attorney who's been practicing for 20, 25 years and went toe to toe with him, at least presentation wise. It wasn't shaking in my shoes, wasn't freaking out. And I would say masonry definitely helped with that. So that would be a tangible thing that people can see that's helped me improve. Something that's a little bit more intangible would probably be developing patience, both through the lessons of masonry and through the actions of masonry, recognizing there are people out there who have a different worldview than I do, recognizing they have a different set of values than I do, but they are just as good and wholesome a person as I am. And really kind of learning that patience, understanding that someone has lived a completely different life than I have, has had different experiences than I have, that's helped me and learn empathy and understand where someone else is coming from.
So you had mentioned earlier, both that you were in the York Rite and Scottish Rite. Are there any other appendant bodies that you're involved with?
Yeah, I'm active in the Shrine right now. In fact, while COVID was going on, I helped organize Ben Hur Shrine's Zoom meetings. I am the vice president or the apprentice brewmaster for the Carboys, the homebrew unit for Ben Hur Shrine. I'm also a member of the Jokers unit or the Clown unit. I can't really pronounce the Joker. We spell it backwards and it's like Screejo or something like that. I'm terrible with pronunciation, but it's the Clown unit. So I'm active with the Shrine. I'm active with the Grotto, and I was for a period active with DMLA, both as an active member until I was 21 and as a senior DMLA advisor.
All right. Well, actually, and that leads me very neatly into the next question I had. That you were very involved with DMLA as a young man. What are your thoughts about the organization and how it helped shape you?
It was a wonderful organization. I joined in 2000. Mostly active until 2003, and then I kind of dropped off when I had my first year of college, and then I picked back up for the oddest of reasons. I went through a really nasty breakup in 2005 with a girlfriend, and I just remember I would have been at like 20 and a half at the time, so I was like 6 months away from going with a senior, and I just called up again my old chapter dad, Scrappy King, and I'm like, I need to laugh. I haven't laughed, and y'all make me laugh. Y'all are like a really good group of guys to be around, and I just need that right It was kind of my coping mechanism during that really nasty breakup. And so then it got me back involved and helped me become an advisor. Um, DMLA, I would say, kind of similar strengths and weaknesses. If you think public speaking as an adult is rough, try doing it when you're a teenager. That's almost worse, because you perceive that you're being judged more harshly by your peers between 17 and 21. So, or excuse me, between 12 and 21. So DMLA really helped out with that. Side note, I'll also say too, at the high school I was at, it was a very small high school, so there were a limited number of girls I could flirt with. Thankfully, because of Rainbow Girls and now since defunct Job's Daughters in Texas, I was able to flirt with girls in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, all over the state. So, as a 17-year-old, that was a huge benefit. But DMLA also, I think, doesn't do a real good job of trying to analyze its problems and figuring out a good solution. I think they have a good brand. Today's Tomorrow's Leaders Today, and Tomorrow's Leaders Today, I think is the slogan, if I remember correctly. But I think DMLA, worse than Masonry, probably has a bigger problem, because I don't see new groups kind of cropping up to challenge Masonry to distract individuals' times. DMLA, if you look at it from, say, the 60s in its heyday, when maybe you had 4-H clubs, FFA, a few other high school organizations, the Boy Scouts, that was really kind of its competition, so to speak. Today, though, teenagers are really striving to get huge college resumes, to get scholarships, to get into schools. They're doing virtually every activity under the sun. And I think that's crowded out DMLA to the point where you've only got 24 hours in a day. You've only got 7 days in a week. And I think DMLA has to compete now with varsity football, basketball, track, baseball, softball, cross country, every varsity sport under the sun that now offers scholarships, every kind of writing camp, public speaking camp that didn't exist in the 60s. And so I think DMLA almost has a harder time in the 21st century than, say, other organizations do, because it's got to carve out what its niche is. And I remember when I was an advisor, it's kind of difficult to go up to a parent and say, I think your son should spend a couple hours a week down at a Masonic lodge. Well, what does my son get out of it for college? I mean, I can write you a letter of recommendation, but that's about it. Whereas these other organizations are giving their son skills that look great on a college entrance resume or a college entrance essay. And I just don't think DMLA really kind of has that kind of pull or that prestige that it did in the 60s. That's not to say that it doesn't mean anything. I see DMLA having a difficult time competing with all that. But for the young men that are in it and enjoy it, you found something that I think is more of a diamond, a hidden treasure that most other people know exists.
All right. Well, and that's a fair assessment. I as a parent of a state officer, I do see there is still some value that like you said before, public speaking. I know, like in my son's case, he's very active with Government Day, and so he's learned parliamentary procedure. And it's interesting to see him how to hold a respectful argument with somebody. That's a valuable skill. And then even weird things that you wouldn't think about, like how to tie a tie, how to wear a suit and feel and look comfortable in it, because some people put on a suit and you could tell they are very uncomfortable wearing it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with Government Day first. That was my event. I loved it. I just absolutely dominated at it when I was there. Me, George Panzik, John Panzik, and Robert Herbig. That was kind of our deal. And the public speaking is there. And like you mentioned, parliamentary procedure, that's helped me out in at least college organizations that used it. I was able to come in with a couple of well-timed, motions and threw people off their kilter. And DMLA I helped out with that. It took me actually after DMLA or meeting other DMLAs to kind of recognize what you just said about wearing the suit. I grew up in a family where we went to church on Sunday. I had to wear a suit on Sundays. I would have to wear a suit when my parents went to certain functions in elementary and junior high school. So I just thought this is the way everyone does it. And then I get to DMLA, and my brother and Albert Pike had that as well. And then we would meet other chapters, and we're like, oh, okay, this is like you said, we need to teach you to wear a suit and to be comfortable in it and recognize you're gonna have to do this a lot more often. It doesn't matter if you're blue collar or white collar. You could go to a trade school, but you're still gonna have to wear a suit from time to time for certain presentations, or if you're gonna go to a function, you know, a gala or something. Just because you're blue collar doesn't mean you're not gonna wear a suit from time to time. It doesn't mean you have to go hog wild and get, you know, the white dinner jacket or the tails, but yeah, you have to learn how to be comfortable. And I remember we got a little upset one year. I think it was my first or second year as an advisor. I saw some kids who were wearing tennis shoes at the Capitol, and I got real taken aback by that. And one of the advisors told me and my other advisor brother, Michael Etheridge, you know, not everyone can afford a suit. It's like, time out. We're not saying go out and get a top of the line custom made suit, but you can go to a secondhand store, Second Looks here in Austin. I'm sure there are other secondhand stores all over the state, or you know, you might not have to go to Goodwill, but you could certainly try it. You can get a nice pair of dress shoes for, you know, $10-$20. I know your kid's going to grow out of them in 6 months. That's not the point. The point is at least make an effort, or if not, talk to one of your advisors. And, you know, I didn't have to do this at Stephen F. Austin, but if one of the kids said, hey, you know, all I've got are tennis shoes, yeah, I would have probably bought a pair of dress shoes for him, because this is what you need when you get into the real world, and I need you to be presentable and succeed. So yeah, the learning, it's almost as if it's cotillion light, I would say, in some respects. Learning how to act, learning how to behave, learning how to present oneself.
Charles, you know, you are sitting master of the Texas Lodge of Research, and Billy, you are the newly elected, or you are the junior warden elect for the Texas Lodge of Research. Charles, can you tell us about the Texas Lodge of Research? And then after you tell us about the Texas Lodge of Research in broad spectrum, can you tell us about how your year as master has gone?
Well, the Texas Lodge of Research is a Masonic lodge in Texas dedicated to research. No,
Da-da-da-da.
yeah, exactly. No, the Texas Lodge of Research, it's a specially articled chartered lodge in Texas. I think it's Article 201. I feel bad, I should know it off the top of my head, but most Masonic lodges and their government come from a certain set of articles, and Lodge of Research and Tranquility Lodge are the two exceptions, and they have their own special articles. So, for example, Lodge of Research, we can't do any degree work. We are forbidden from doing degree work. Our year, I think, is March to March, or as close to that as possible. And I don't get an extra vote at Grand Lodge. Simply because I'm the Worshipful Master Lodge of Research doesn't mean I get to show up with my past master vote and then 3 votes from the Lodge of Research. I don't get that. So while we're denied certain privileges and prerogatives, we do get extra privileges, such as it's relatively cheap to join. I think you get a lot for your value. Since it's going to happen anyway, if you want to join, I would talk to Brad Billings about it, right? Worshipful Brad Billings, because he's usually the one that brings about 15 or 20 or so petitions for affiliation to a meeting. We meet quarterly. We do presentations. If you join, you become what's called an associate member. So you are a member, but you don't get to vote. And you don't get to hold elected office. To do that and to earn the apron, the gold bordered apron with the Lone Star in it, and at the bottom, GLRT, Grand Lodge of the Republic of Texas, you have to present a paper that we will then vote on. You have to go through the editorial process. And I'm going to go ahead and make a pitch right now for the editorial process. A lot of members are scared by it. Don't be scared by it. They're there to help you. They're there to assist you. They want to take your paper and make it better. that doesn't mean that every paper is a great idea. I remember when I was senior warden and chairman of the committee, I saw some papers on there that I'm like, we need to refine this better. And I knew the committee would do it much better than I could. But let's take your idea, let's refine it, let's turn this into something that's workable and manageable presentation wise, so that way you can get that apron. They're helping you. They're not trying to knock you down. It's not a gatekeeper function. They're there to assist you and get you to that finished final product. That being said, papers range anywhere from lodge histories to biographies of famous Texas Masons to interesting coincidences in Masonry. I would say probably the vast majority of them are histories of some kind. My paper was a little bit different. It was how Freemasonry inspired the Greek fraternity system, specifically Lambda Chi Alpha, my Greek fraternity, Kappa Sigma, and Sigma Alpha Epsilon, or SAE. So and I mean, looking at my research, that could have turned into a book. I had to narrow it down, and that was one of the pieces of advice I got from my editorial committee when I was submitting it was, you've essentially got a dissertation right here. You need to really pare this down. And I think I pared it down too much. It wound up being one of the shortest presentations in the history of the Lodge of Research. I think it wound up being like 7 or 8 pages or something. So that's the other thing. Just don't worry about time limit. Make sure you have a good thesis and facts to back it up and a way to argue it. And for the most part, you'll be okay. The Lodge of Research is also probably like a super network, so to speak. I probably would never have met Brad Billings, Jim Rumsey, Chris Livingston, a few other individuals, Billy Hamilton, but through the Lodge of Research. It really was a super network that allowed me as an Austinite to meet Masons all over the state. And it's special to me that way. Same as the Tranquility Lodges as well. But to be able to meet with individuals that I never-wise probably would have crossed paths with unless I frequented Dallas or Houston, it really helped out a lot. So it's a nice kind of like mini state convention, so to speak, at each firm. And I'll also say this too, Lodge of Research is in a unique position in that I think it also has the most fraternity of any organization. I referenced earlier in the podcast the Friday night dinners and kind of social hours. Those are a lot of fun. I mean, my wife really does look forward to those. And she noticed that the wives and girlfriends in the Texas Lodge of Research are in some ways more social than the guys are. And so that's something that definitely appealed to my wife, that the ladies would definitely enjoy a spirited beverage is a good way to put it, and you know, really kind of go toe to toe with the guys, and you know, be witty and intelligent. It was a lot of fun, and it still is a lot of fun. And that's kind of usually the selling point I give to new members is, if you're going to join, you've got to come to the Friday night dinners and the Friday night socials, because that's really where the fraternity happens. That's where a lot of fun happens. It's the only time I can say that I've been able to poke a past Grandmaster and push his buttons.
All right, and Gabriel's actually experienced the Friday night festivities.
I have. As you know, as an associate member, I get to show up and hang out and have fun, and the festivities are indeed quite entertaining.
Yeah,
I won't elaborate on anything.
And I mean, the papers are a lot of are educational too. I mean, I've heard lodge histories for lodges that you know I didn't even know existed. So that's always fun. I've heard biographies of individuals that I didn't know existed or didn't understand their meaning and their significance until I heard it through the Lodge of Research. I'm working on a paper right now that kind of talks about early Austin Masonry. I'm hoping to get it done by the time I go out of office for my master's paper. And when I went back and looked at the history of Austin from about 1836 to about 1900, I was really impressed to see how often Austin 12, Hill City 456, Lone Star 6, Lone Star Chapter number 6, Royal Arch Masons, and Colorado Commander number 4, Knights Templar, were frequented in the newspapers, including leading a procession from 7th and Congress, then known as Bois d'Arc and Congress, up to the Capitol to lay the cornerstone in 1886. Those 4 bodies were part of that and were included in a time capsule. I think it was like their list of officers. And then earlier in 1883, they did the exact same thing. Or excuse me, later in 1910, I think it was 1910, they went up to UT and laid the cornerstone for the UT Tower. And so just seeing that they were that active in Austin civic life was quite impressive. The historian at Ben-Hur Shrine has also been compiling a lot of that from a shrine perspective as well. There was a time where Ben-Hur actually owned a barge that would go out into the Colorado River, and they would have parties on it. So it's just kind of interesting to realize, especially in a city like Austin, where I feel like we're the black hole of masonry now. We're just kind of the afterthought. But there was at one time, it was an integral part of our civic life. One of the questions I think you also asked too that I've elaborated on is, how's my year as master been? Well, with COVID, it's been a lot of fun. Normally I would have had 4 meetings, and I think I got 2.5. We had to do our installation in June. We got to do our Anson Jones lecture in September. We had to cancel December, and then thankfully my junior warden Christian Moore, the Worshipful Master elect, let me have one last meeting in March. He's kind of postponed his installation of officers till June. One positive that came out of COVID though is we were able to utilize Zoom to now have presentations outside of a lodge setting, which I think is exciting. Our Anson Jones lecturer, Right Worshipful Oscar Aline, Junior Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of New York, did not want to travel for obvious reasons in the midst of COVID, and asked if he could do his presentation in New York and transmit it to Texas. And I said, not only is that a great idea, now you can invite anyone you want in New York to participate and watch. And that wound up happening. We wound up having a few foreigners on it. And I think that presentation, or that ability to do presentations now on Zoom, has really opened up some possibilities for the Lodge of Research. Going to Christian's year, Richard Schwadroff, who's our senior warden-elect, and of course Billy, our junior warden-elect, to allow them to now get speakers that might not have been available to us, even though we would have paid for their travel. We now might have an opportunity to get transatlantic speakers. Maybe the Master of Coronati Lodge could be a speaker for the Lodge of Research. I would love to be able to say, yeah, we're flying you in from Britain, but we don't have the money for that. We might not be able to convince the membership to do that. But now with Zoom, he can stay in England and be able to make a presentation. So I think the year, most masters probably would have been upset at the way the year turned out. I thought it was a groundbreaking year, in that I can now give to my, the guys coming after me, new options on how they want to do presentations, how they want to present those presentations, and who they want to include on those presentations.
Was there anything that surprised you about the role of master when you were going through the process? Obviously, you had a pandemic interfere, but kind of intrinsically to the position without the pandemic, was there something that surprised you?
Not really. I mean, it's an unwritten rule in Lodge of Research that you have to be a past master of the lodge before you can be the master of Lodge of Research. I don't know how long that's been around. Maybe it's been around since the early the mid 50s when it was founded, or what. But having already been a Worshipful Master, becoming a Master of the Lodge of Research at that point, it was, well, I don't have to worry about organizing degree teams or reaching out to my senior deacon about that. Although now I have a lot more VIPs. So Brother Senior Deacon, as Billy can probably attest to this, and I had to do it when I was Senior Deacon, you got to get there early, and you got to figure out who signed in on the register that's a VIP. You got to look at the audience. You got to figure out, who, it's one thing to be senior deacon of a Blue Lodge. It's pretty easy to know when the district deputy is there because your district deputy. But at the Lodge of Research, you have about 7 or 8 district deputies that can show up, and there's how many district deputies in the state of Texas? And I'll challenge anyone to name all of them and have their face memorized. So you have to really know it. if the Grand Master is visiting, he's going to have his entourage, and you got to make sure that you have properly introduced every individual. And then, of course, does the Grand Master want to be officially received or not? And if the Grand Master does, I've never received a Grand Master at Hill City, and because of the pandemic, I didn't have the opportunity to do it here. But I have been at Lodge of Research meetings where we have formally received the Grand Master of Mason for Texas, and you've got to know that ritual part and understand what you're doing. But yeah, you don't have to organize esoteric degrees, so that's kind of a nice load off your shoulder. You're only meeting quarterly, so you don't have to come up with 12 different programs. You don't have to come up with 4. If you've got a really good senior warden, which I was blessed with in Christian Moore, they've got a committee that can tell you, here's when papers are getting ready to come out, and we need to carve up some time to do this paper presentation. Well, great, I can look on my schedule, and the secretary and I can pencil you in, and you're good to go. So I'd say in many ways, being Worshipful Master of the Lodge of Research is easier, and in some ways it's a little bit more challenging.
Actually, that is funny, though. Being senior deacon, I can attest, before a Texas Lodge of Research meeting, you look around and you're like, okay, who's here? And then you have like a checklist that there's a very formal way in that they are introduced at the beginning of a Texas Lodge of Research meeting. And so you got to say, okay, this column, then we move to this column. And it's actually a little bit of a group effort, because, I went up to you and went up to Richard and was like, okay, is this that person? And yeah, you're checking the sign-in list. So it is a wash with dignitaries.
Charles, do you have any advice for brethren that are looking to write a paper for TLR?
Yeah, look for something that's always interested you about Masonry that you don't have the answer to. Maybe it's a symbol. Maybe it's part of the esoteric questions and why they're asked the way they are. It could be the history of Texas Masonry, and there's certain aspects of it that you don't quite understand. Look for something that you don't know and try to answer it. If you can't think of something, and trust me, it takes a while to come up with a paper idea. Talk to some past masters in your lodge, or kind of that old guard, that senior guard that's been around for a while, and see what do they not know about this, and what's something that they've always wanted answered. Talk, ask questions. It doesn't matter who it is. There's always someone who doesn't know something, and to me, those are the papers that I enjoy the most, where I absolutely learned something completely new that I didn't know. Because now you've got my attention, and I'm going to go ahead and say this quite arrogantly. You got my attention. You probably got the audience's attention, because now you're talking about something that we don't know about, and we're eager to learn. So find out something that isn't answered, and I guarantee you, there's a lot out there that isn't answered. Look at all the books out there about Masonry, and maybe look at, if something's not answered, but there's 2 conflicting answers, talk about it and discuss it in your paper, and try to come up with a reasoned argument as to why one side is more correct than the other. The other advice I would say too is keep your paper tailored to a presentation. It's very easy to go down the rabbit hole and think everything is important, and then lo and behold, you now have a 100-page paper that people are going to be falling asleep to 20 minutes into it, and now you're getting negative returns because no one's paying attention to the paper. And that's where the editorial committee really comes in. 1, they're going to help you with your argument, and 2, they're going to help you figure out what works, what doesn't, what fits your thesis, what doesn't, and what needs to come out. And finally, the last piece of advice going with the editorial committee, don't be scared of them. I've seen a number of Masons who have been scared of the editorial committee, and I guess maybe because I've known all of them for so long, it just baffles my imagination. How could you be scared of these guys? Yes, they're going to critique your paper. That's their job. They are editors. It's in the name. But that doesn't mean they hate your paper. That doesn't mean they hate you. What they're doing is they're wanting to bring your paper up to a level that is worthy of the Texas Lodge of Research. And every paper can do that. Sometimes it's more work than others. I think my paper on Greek fraternities spent a year in the editorial process of just back and forth. It probably took me about 6 months to write it and a year to edit it through the editorial process. And so that's something I would tell people too is don't be scared of it. It's manageable. It will happen. And then when you get that sign off from the editorial committee at the next stated meeting, you'll present your paper. You know, be ready for the press conference, because there are going to be some individuals in that audience who are going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and just be prepared for it. And great answer. If you don't know the answer, sounds like a great question for the second version of my paper.
So would you say there's any topics that maybe, if someone is interested in writing a paper, maybe some topics that would be better in a different forum than the Texas Lodge of Research?
Kind of like how there's pseudoscience and pseudo-archaeology, I would say pseudo-masonry. Kind of that aspect of masonry where you kind of have to go to second and third tier sources, and we're tangentially attaching masonry to other philosophical and esoteric concepts. Those probably are not meant for the Lodge of Research. We're looking for something that's ironclad, easy to verify, that isn't pseudo masonry, is I guess a good way of putting it. You know, be careful of attaching masonry to certain outdated and outmoded ideas that just kind of screams this. How did you get there? And your source is some 17th or 18th century philosopher who was probably drinking hemlock on the side. That's probably not a good TLR paper. A good TLR paper would be, let's examine, you know, the impact of Texas masonry on you know, maybe certain aspects of the legislature, maybe how masonry came through and helped build certain towns in Texas. You know, first of all, kind of, if it's Texas centric, it's pretty good. But I would also say you could look at philosophies. I mean, explore something that Pike wrote about in the 1800s and maybe present a counter argument to it, using, again, primary sources and good reasoned argument. But the what I would call the pseudo masonry, kind of in that same vein of pseudoscience and pseudo archaeology. Don't talk to me about ancient aliens and masonry. If I were on the editorial committee, I would say this is not worthy of a TLR paper, because it's going to be next to impossible to prove it.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't mean that you know, there's not an appropriate outlet for it. There just may be a better one than TLR, which is going to be more factually based. Are there any mentors in particular that you would say helped you in your path in masonry? You know, and not necessarily narrowed down to a Masonic lens, but mentors in general.
I'll kind of branch off from that. I kind of have a way I want to phrase that. What I would kind of consider my Masonic mentor, Mount Rushmore, kind of, I'm just limiting it to 4 guys because there's certainly a lot out there that have assisted and helped me. But kind of the 4 that I would say, you know, are the most meaningful and the ones that have helped me the most would be Charlie Stewart of Albert Pike Lodge and now Hill City Lodge. He taught me my DMLA esoteric work. He taught me my Masonic esoteric work. He was active in the arts. And so when I was doing theater in high school, he really helped out with projection, presentation, acting skills. He even recommended a couple of good monologues for me to do for competition. James Rodriguez is another one. He was my chapter advisor at Albert Pike DMLA when I was master counselor. He taught me how to react and be calm and cool under pressure. If you've ever met James, he's not just coolest in terms of hip, but he's coolest under pressure of any person I've ever met, not only in masonry, but probably my entire life. I don't think I've ever seen him get unflapped. He's just that calm. And so he's definitely been a good mentor. The third would be Scrappy King. He was the chapter advisor when I was active at Stephen F. Austin chapter, and I just became the chairman. He was very, you know, matter of fact, let's talk about this, let's cut straight to the chase, and just a really good conversationalist. He's definitely been a good mentor. And finally, if you've known me for 20 years, this probably comes as no surprise, but this is the good segue from masonry to professional life, because he's the one of 2 individuals that straddles both. that'd be Right Worshipful Reese Harrison. I'm probably going to get some hate mail on that, but he was there when I was initiated in DMLA when I was 15 years old. When I remember I sent an email out to some academic advisors, and I think I included him on it. And it was, I'm interested in going to graduate school for policy, maybe going on and getting a PhD. What should I do? And up to that point in 09, Right Worshipful and I would probably have we knew each other, we talked to each other, but it wasn't really a close relationship. He called me up out of the blue and spent an hour and a half on the phone. Here's why you shouldn't get a PhD in policy. Here's what you should do. Really great career advice. I remember when I got accepted to the LDJ school, he was absolutely ecstatic. For a few years, he was bragging, that's one of my DMLAs, and he went to the Lyndon Johnson School of Public Affairs up at that state school in Austin. He and I rib each other on the Baylor Bears and the Longhorns. In fact, I had to eat some crow recently because Baylor just won a national championship and UT lost its coach. So, yeah, I had to eat some crow on that. And then when I went to law school, same thing. I mean, I would frequently call him up for lunch. I think we would probably, out of an hour and a half long lunch, we'd probably spend 20 minutes on masonry and the remaining hour talking the law, career, expectations, what should I look for in an employer? What should I look for in a career path? And he, again, I mean, we would talk masonry, but that was more legal world stuff that we would talk about. And that was an immense help. And again, when he found out I got the job as an assistant attorney general, I remember announcing it at a grotto meeting, and he just started beaming. And his wife, Judy, pulled my wife aside and, just congratulated top and bottom. And one thing I'll say too, he gave a good tactic for me to use at a hearing one time, since that my boss is like, you can't do this. It's too evil. It's too good. We're the state. We don't get to do it. But my office is in a lawsuit representing a landowner that I'll leave the name out, but it was an investment company. They're called Blank Investment Limited. I'll just say John Doe Investment Limited. And I was talking to Right Worshipful about it, and he said, when you're doing voir dire, which is when you're impaneling the jury, and when you're talking and opening arguments and talking in front of the jury, don't call them John Doe Investment Limited. Call them John Doe Trust Fund or John Doe, Mutual Fund or something, and draw the objection and force their attorneys to say, no, it's an investment limited. Because in the minds of the jury, it's, well, what's the difference? So now they're objecting over something meaningless, and they're highlighting that this isn't, Ma and Pa Jones that we're taking property from. This is an actual investment company. So maybe you should weigh this a little differently. And I'm telling it to my boss, and she's laughing, and she's like, that is diabolical. That is evil. I love it so much. You can't do it. And so I just love being able to talk to the Right Worshipful about certain cases I've got, and just being able to discuss the law with him, and hearing about his trial stories. And going back to failures, he told me about a case he lost. And he told me the lessons he learned in losing that case. He was a young assistant U.S. attorney, and he basically said, you need to do X, Y, and Z, theme theory, communicate with your jury. Don't think that just because the law is on your side, you're going to win this case. And he very much spoke to me from a failure perspective and say, don't do this, learn from my mistakes so you can be a better attorney. One other mentor I'm also going to mention, and I mentioned previously, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk more, would definitely be my parents, especially my father. My mother did not go to college. She graduated high school, and she has worked extensively in campaigns. She, I think, is better than even Right Worshipful Brad Billings at walking into a room and electrifying a room and making you feel like you're her best friend. She has a charisma that I envy and cannot touch, but she knows how to walk into a room and read a room. And she gave me one of the best lessons I've ever learned in politics. It's the Ted Kennedy lesson. And I remember I came home in 7th grade and I said, I want to run for class president. And she said, that's great. Why? Why do you want to be class president? I could not answer the question. I mean, I'm 14 years old. I could barely answer the question to begin with. And she said, if you can do it for a reason other than yourself, I'm not going to guarantee you'll win, but I'll guarantee you'll have a fighting chance. If you do it for a reason that is just yourself, you're going to lose. And to tell that to a 13, 14-year-old was pretty ballsy, but it stuck with me for 25 years. So I'll give her due in teaching me that political lesson. And then my dad, again, I've been close with my parents. My dad, again, is an attorney. He taught me a lot about the law. Probably one of the first lessons he taught me was every case has a winning strategy. You just have to discover it. And it takes hours upon hours in the library, reading books, reading cases. It will not come to you immediately. And it will just suddenly happen when you're driving on I-35 and you're like, oh, that's theory I need. And you'll get it. But they both did a really good job of laying the foundation for helping me be the person I am, teaching me how to network, teaching me how to research, give presentations. Again, I remember writing a paper, I think it was in 6th or 7th grade. It was one of those typical like 2-page, this wasn't the subject, but I'm just ripping off the movie, Think You're Smoking. Why is America the best country in the world? And that conversation that Joey Naylor has with his father almost mirrored the conversation I had with my father, where my dad's like, that's not your answer. That can't be your answer. That's a terrible answer. That's a terrible question. I'm going to teach you how to argue. And he very much taught me, if you argue correctly, you're never wrong. And so he was very good at, this is a 7th grade paper. I only need 2 pages on patriotism and freedom, apple pie. And he's like, no, I'm going to really bring your game up and I'm going to make you write something that is 5-star.
I mean, those are some fantastic mentors. What do you, to distill all of that, what would you say that you feel constitutes a good leader?
One, recognize your audience. Does your flock want to be led? Do they want input in the process? There are sometimes passive flocks that are just like, you're the leader, go make decisions and we'll live with it. Sometimes you'll have flocks that say, no, you're our leader, but we're still going to kind of constitute a committee of the whole that you just get to chair and we want to sit at the table. So first of all, read your audience, know who you're speaking to. I've been in some organizations where I've had the former and some where I've had the latter, and just being able to adapt to that and recognize that you have to read your audience and read your group really helps out. 2, know why you're doing it. Again, if you're doing it to help the body, to help people, to make them better, you're going to be a good leader because you're going to try to find ways to figure out how can I help you. If it's about you, now I'm going to use a Masonic phrase, if it's about just you sitting in the East with the hat and everyone bowing and scraping your presence, and I've seen plenty of those at the local and the state level, you're not going to be a good leader, and I'm already going to tune you out, and I'm just going to wait for the year to go by because you'll be gone. But if you do it to help individuals and to help the body, that's also what makes a good leader. And that requires communication, which I hate to say this, for those of you who are single, communication in relationships is just as essential as communication in organizations. Talk to your members, listen to your members. The Most Worshipful in his message has talked about listening to your members and finding out what our members need from the body. And I think any good leader needs to do that. What are you looking for? Why are you here? And how can I help you? And how can I direct you in place to get you what you need? Listening is far more important. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm a terrible listener. I can at times, but there are some times where I'm in my own little world. I'm off on my own route, on my own train, and I'm just not listening. So then if you're not a good listener, you need to surround yourself with people who are good listeners who can listen for you and then help you out. And that also gets to delegating. Don't be afraid to delegate. And this is another one where I'm terrible at. Sometimes I just say, screw it, I'll do it myself. Find people that know how to work hard and do it. I would also say finally what constitutes a good leader, being able to recognize that you have to make a decision. Don't be afraid of failure. And if you fail, learn from it. You're not John Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You're not going to blow up the world if you make a bad decision. you might get skewered for a little bit. I famously, in my office, I have a caricature from when I was at UT, and I was presiding over the student government elections, and I made a decision that everyone hated. Half the student body thought I went too far, the other half thought I didn't go far enough. And so there's a political cartoon drawing of me banging the gavel, throwing the rule book out, and it's framed in my office. And the only problem I had with it, I called my buddy who is the editor of the Texan, and I said, I just saw your cartoon. And he's like, oh, great. I'm sorry. I'm like, no. I love it. But your artist drew me with two right hands. So I'm banging the gavel with my proper right hand. And then like my other hand is contorted in a way that I'm like, your cartoon is screwed up. That's the only complaint I have with it. Otherwise, no, screw this. My mother's got copies. My dad has copies. My sisters love it because I'm being lampooned. Enjoy it. Enjoy the licks you get. People will complain just to complain. People will complain because it was your idea, not their idea. You just learn to tune it out. Let it run off your shoulders, and adapt a way to learn how to figure out what's legit criticism. What's criticism from someone who says, I've been there. I know what you're doing. We tried it. It didn't work. Here's why it didn't work. And maybe you're doing the exact same things. And so, don't do the same thing twice. Or you're doing something completely different, and then see what the input on that is. Don't be afraid to make decisions. And don't be afraid to solicit legitimate critiques and figure out how to weed out legitimate from non-legitimate critiques.
Charles, do you have anything that you wanted to bring up or on the podcast or announce or?
Next Text Logic Research meeting, I believe, will be Saturday, June 12th in Waco, Texas. I can't remember if we're meeting at Waco Lodge or if we're meeting at Baylor Lodge, but it will be, or we could be meeting at the Grand Lodge. I can't remember where, but you would think the Worshipful Master would know this, but the daughter is definitely keeping me up at night and making me forget certain things. But the next meeting will be Saturday, June 12th at 2 p.m. in Waco, Texas. It's open to all Master Masons. We typically do have a meal prepared, and the non-tiled portions are certainly open to family, friends, and visitors, COVID restrictions notwithstanding as well.
So actually, I can fill in the rest of that. It will be at the Grand Lodge of Texas, down in the downstairs auditorium. So yes, actually looking forward to that.
Yes. It'll be our installation of officers. Our installations are always open. We always call to refreshment for that. And I don't know if we'll have any paper presentations. I think we're going to have one, maybe two, and those are also open to the public. So again, except for the tiled portions that have to be tiled, we tend to try to include non-Masons as much as possible.
So let's go ahead and move into the quote of the week, which is very short. Last time, I think we had a much longer one. So this one is simply, to hold a pen is to be at war, which was said by Brother Voltaire.
It's like he was a lawyer.
To hold a pen is to be at war. Man, how true is that? That's cool. Well, folks, if you would like to learn more about our podcast, you can reach us at www.fortworth148.org. We are at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook. Our email is info148@fortworth148.org. And what is the address for the Texas Lodge of Research?
If you'd like to visit the Texas Lodge of Research website, which has thankfully now been updated, it's www.texas.lodgeofresearch.org. You can also find us on Facebook. And if you'd like to contact the secretary, it's secretary spelled out .Texas Lodge of Research, also spelled out, @gmail.com. And if you're looking for a physical address, it is Texas Lodge of Research, P.O. Box 686, Hereford, Texas 79045-0686.
Very cool.
And by the way, you do not have to just approach Brother Right Worshipful Brad Billings to
You can approach
petition.
any full member in good standing.
Yeah, I'm always happy when I have one petition in there and it's like, yes, it's not all Brad. So,
Yeah. Every now and then when I have like the one, I'm like, yeah, it's not just you.
No-
However,
no
you
offense
you
to
don't
Brad.
earn your pin until we'll vote on you at the first meeting, and then your first full meeting as an associate member is when you get your lapel pin. So it's a little bit of an incentive to come to the meetings.
Nice.
And I think the meetings next year are San Angelo September 18th, San Marcos December 4th, and Lubbock the following March of 2022.
excellent. So that brings us to the end of the podcast. And thank you very much, Charles, for being with us today. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me, guys. Really enjoyed it.
All right. So with that, this is Billy Hamilton signing off.
This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
This is Charles Maddox signing off.